Hans-Ulrich Rudel was born on July 2, 1916, in the quiet Prussian province of Silesia, a land of rolling fields, slow rivers, and villages that smelled of cut grass and coal smoke. He was the son of a Lutheran minister, a man of strict discipline, and a mother who believed strength came from hardship. From the start, Hans was different from other boys. He was thin, small, and often sick as a child, the kind of boy adults expected to become a schoolteacher, not a warrior. But beneath his weak body was a will that seemed carved from iron. Rudel did not fear pain. He did not fear failure. And he absolutely did not fear danger. His childhood friends would later say, Hans never walked away from anything, even things that terrified other boys. He ran toward them. The first signs of a pilot. By the age of 10, Rudel had already developed an obsession with anything that flew. Every time he heard the distant buzzing of an airplane, he would sprint outside, eyes scanning the sky like a hawk. He collected newspaper pictures of aircraft. He built wooden models that hung from his bedroom ceiling like little dreams waiting to take flight. While other children played simple games, Hans challenged himself to climb the tallest trees, jump across dangerous gaps, and test the limits of his fear. His father often found him standing on the roof of their farmhouse, arms spread wide, pretending to fly. His mother would shout, "Hans, get down from there!" But Hans only smiled. He loved the feeling of height. He loved the feeling of risk. A Germany in transformation. Germany in the 1920s and early 1930s was a country wounded and humiliated after WWII. There was poverty everywhere. Politics were chaotic, and military restrictions crushed national pride. But as political winds shifted, uniforms returned to the streets, planes returned to the skies, and Hans Rudel felt something awaken inside him. He didn't care about ideology or speeches. He cared only about one thing. He failed at many things. He scored low in sports. His classmates teased him for being skinny. But Hans never quit. He trained harder every day, running uphill for hours, doing push-ups until his arms gave out. His father once said, "Hans fights his own body more fiercely than most men fight an enemy." This mental toughness would later make him the most feared pilot on the Eastern Front, the moment that sparked his destiny. In 1932, at age 16, Rudel visited an air show. He watched as a pilot performed breathtaking maneuvers, dives, spins, rolls, movements that defied gravity and fear. Hans stood there, frozen, breathless, and whispered to himself, "One day, I'll do that. One day, I'll fly like that." That moment sealed his fate. A weak child no one believed in was about to become the single most destructive pilot of WWII, a man who sank ships, destroyed tanks, and survived wounds that would have killed anyone else. Hans-Ulrich Rudel's legend had just begun. Hans-Ulrich Rudel's dream of flying was clear, but getting into the Luftwaffe was another story. In 1936, at age 20, he applied for pilot training with the same fire that drove him since childhood. But the instructors noticed the same weaknesses people had pointed out all his life. He was thin. He lacked strength. He didn't look like a fighter pilot. And worst of all, he struggled with basic flying skills. While other cadets mastered aerial maneuvers, Rudel took longer. His reactions were slower. His coordination wasn't impressive. Many believed he would wash out, the cadet who would not break. But Hans Rudel had something they did not, a refusal to quit. When others slept, he trained. When they relaxed, he repeated exercises alone on empty fields, hours of running, climbing, and punishing his body to reshape himself. A senior instructor once said, "Rudel wasn't born strong. He built his strength by sheer force of will. The Luftwaffe noticed this, not his talent, but his discipline, his hunger, his obsession, a harsh reality. By the end of training, his instructors made a decision. Rudel would not become a fighter pilot. He wasn't fast enough, aggressive enough, or precise enough in the air. So they assigned him to something they thought suited him, a new obsession: perfection. During reconnaissance training, Rudel pushed harder than any man in his unit. He studied maps for hours. He memorized enemy positions. He learned how to fly low, fly steady, fly through danger. Even though he wasn't flying a combat aircraft, he treated every flight like it mattered. Instructors noticed something unusual. Rudel's stamina was incredible. He could fly longer missions than anyone else. He never complained. He never lost focus. They began to wonder, did we underestimate him? The Stuka that called his name. One afternoon in 1938, Rudel watched as a squadron of Ju-87 dive bombers, the legendary Stukas, performed practice dives. The sound of their sirens echoed across the sky. A terrifying howl meant to crush enemy morale. But to Rudel, the sound was beautiful. There, in that moment, he understood his true calling. Not reconnaissance, but the Stuka, the brutal, precise, terrifying dive bomber. He whispered to himself, "That is the machine I was born for." But the Luftwaffe still refused. They saw him as unfit for the Stuka. They didn't know they were denying destiny itself, preparing for war. As 1939 approached, whispers of conflict spread across Europe. Germany's powers grew. The skies filled with new machines, and pilots trained harder than ever. Hans-Ulrich Rudel watched it all with burning eyes. He wasn't in a combat role, not yet, but he believed deep inside war would give him his chance, and he would not waste it. Little did he know, he would soon become the most feared Stuka pilot the world had ever seen. A man who would change the war on the Eastern Front. War arrived exactly as Hans-Ulrich Rudel expected. Fast, violent, and unstoppable. On 1st September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and the skies over. Europe turned into battlegrounds of roaring engines and falling bombs. Rudel was stationed with a reconnaissance unit, not the Stuka squadrons he admired. He watched other pilots, men no stronger, no more determined than him, climb into the dive bombers he desperately wanted to fly. It burned him from the inside, a soldier without a war. While other units were sent into intense combat, Rudel's tasks were simple: fly high, take photos, return safely. It was necessary work, but it did nothing to satisfy the fire inside him. Every time he saw the Stukas dive, screaming from the sky with surgical accuracy, he felt like a warrior forced to carry a pen instead of a sword. And yet, even in this role, Rudel excelled. His reconnaissance reports were flawless. His endurance was unmatched. He flew more hours than any other pilot in his group. But he knew something was wrong. His commander once told him, "Rudel, you're too ambitious for a reconnaissance pilot." Rudel smiled slightly. "Sir, I'm just waiting for the real challenge, the mission that changed everything." Late in 1939, while flying a low-altitude recon mission, Rudel performed an extremely dangerous maneuver. His plane descended so close to the ground that trees brushed beneath the wings. Why? To confirm whether a suspected Polish artillery battery was real. He brought back the evidence, perfectly photographed, and the Luftwaffe used the information to launch a devastating strike. That mission made generals take notice. A pilot so bold, so precise, so willing to risk everything. They wondered, why isn't this man flying a Stuka? A fly with no fear. In the air, Rudel transformed. The nervous cadet was gone. The quiet boy was gone. What remained was a man who treated danger like a familiar friend. Rudel wants to be a hero. Heroes die first. But the man couldn't have been more wrong. Hans-Ulrich Rudel wasn't chasing glory. He was chasing purpose. Rejection. Again, at the end of the Poland campaign, Rudel requested, for the fourth time, to transfer into a Stuka unit. He believed his performance earned it, but once again, rejected. They called him technically weak, not aggressive enough, not fighter material. The decision should have broken him. Instead, it forged him. He told himself, if the Luftwaffe won't trust me, I will force them to. The world prepares for a bigger war. By early 1940, Europe was on edge. Norway, France, the Low Countries, the Balkans. The entire continent was shifting. The Luftwaffe needed more pilots than ever before, and inside that chaos, destiny was finally moving toward him. Rudel didn't know it yet, but very soon he would sit inside the cockpit he dreamed about since childhood, and the world would never forget his name. After years of obsession, endurance, and relentless training, Hans-Ulrich Rudel finally received the opportunity he had been waiting for, assignment to a WWII Stuka dive bomber unit. The moment he climbed into the cockpit for the first time, a surge of purpose and adrenaline coursed through him. The plane wasn't just metal and machinery, it was an extension of his own spirit. Learning the art of destruction, Rudel quickly mastered the Stuka's controls, dive angles, bomb release timing, precision targeting. Everything demanded perfection. He trained longer than anyone else, repeated drills in rain, wind, and freezing temperatures, until his movements became instinctive. Instructors noticed a rare trait. Rudel didn't fear the dive. Where most pilots hesitated, he thrived. Where others flinched under anti-aircraft fire, he smiled at the danger. A commanding officer remarked, "Rudel doesn't just fly, he hunts, and nothing survives his eyes." First combat mission. Rudel's first combat mission came in the spring of 1940, during the invasion of France. The roar of the Stuka engines, the screeching siren, the dizzying dives. It was exactly what he had imagined since childhood. He released his bombs with surgical precision, taking out artillery positions that had pinned down German infantry for days. For Rudel, it wasn't about glory. It was mastery over the chaos of war, a skill he honed through years of preparation. His comrades noticed something unusual. Even under fire, Rudel remained calm, calculating, precise, a predator in the sky, the birth of a legend. After this first mission, his reputation began to spread. He was meticulous, fearless, and relentless. The Luftwaffe brass began taking notes on his flights. His unit quickly realized Rudel wasn't just another pilot, he was a force of nature. But the war was only beginning. Rudel had tasted the thrill of the Stuka, but the real tests lay ahead on the Eastern Front, where his skills, courage, and survival instincts would be pushed to their limits. By the end of Chapter 4, Hans-Ulrich Rudel had transformed from a rejected cadet into a lethal Stuka pilot, ready to etch his name into history. Hans-Ulrich Rudel had conquered the skies over France, but the Luftwaffe's true challenge lay to the east. In June 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Endless forests, frozen rivers, and vast plains became the stage for the deadliest battles of the war. Rudel's Stuka unit was deployed to support German ground forces, tasked with destroying tanks, artillery, and supply convoys. First encounters with Russian armor. The Eastern Front was a terrifying new reality. Soviet T-34 tanks and Katyusha. Rocket launchers were unlike anything Rudel had faced in France. But Rudel thrived in adversity. He studied tank movements, analyzed terrain, and perfected low-level attack, runs that minimized exposure while maximizing destruction. During his first major encounter, Rudel dove through a hail of anti-aircraft fire, releasing bombs with precision that destroyed a column of Soviet tanks. Comrades recalled, "He flies closer than any man should, and yet always comes back. It's like he has a shield no one else can see, surviving impossible odds." The Eastern Front demanded more than skill. It demanded unrelenting courage. Rudel's aircraft was riddled by bullets on multiple occasions. Anti-aircraft fire shredded wings. Yet he returned, often with smoke trailing from the fuselage, wounded but unbroken. It was here that Rudel's legend truly began to grow. His audacity inspired fellow pilots. His fearlessness terrified the enemy, and his precision attacks crippled Soviet advances again and again. The making of a tank killer. Rudel began to specialize in anti-tank missions. Using the Ju-87G variant, armed with 37mm cannons, he destroyed dozens of armored vehicles with terrifying efficiency. By the end of the first month, Rudel had earned recognition among his peers and superiors. If anyone can destroy Soviet tanks from the air, it's Rudel. He sees the target before the enemy even knows it exists. The man behind the machine. Despite the destruction, Rudel remained disciplined, almost ascetic. He kept meticulous records of his flights, his kills, and the technical performance of his aircraft. In letters home, he wrote, "The skies demand absolute focus. One mistake, and it is the end. Yet in this chaos I feel most alive." Marks the transformation of Rudel into a war machine, a Stuka pilot whose courage, skill, and unrelenting persistence would define his career on the Eastern Front. Hans-Ulrich Rudel's reputation on the Eastern Front was no longer just a rumor. It was a legend whispered among both German and Soviet soldiers. By 1942, he had fully mastered the Ju-87G dive bomber, specially modified with twin 37mm cannons designed for destroying tanks. Where other pilots hesitated, Rudel dove without fear, attacking armored columns head-on, often under intense anti-aircraft fire, mastering the impossible. Rudel's missions were calculated down to the second, dive angle precisely measured, bomb release timed with machine-like accuracy, enemy positions mapped meticulously. Yet, despite the planning, the missions remained life-threatening. Soviet gunners learned to anticipate Stuka attacks, and many pilots were shot down. But Rudel seemed almost untouchable. His focus, courage, and uncanny ability to sense danger kept him alive, while his aircraft destroyed dozens of enemy tanks in a single sortie. The price of bravery. Every mission left its mark. Rudel was wounded multiple times. Bullets, shrapnel, and frostbite were constant companions. Once, a near-fatal crash left him hospitalized, but he returned to the front as soon as possible, refusing to let injuries stop him. Fellow pilots said, "Rudel doesn't just survive, he dominates. He flies like death itself, precise, unstoppable, and terrifying." Building a record. By late 1942, Rudel had destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks, earning him the nickname, the Tank Killer of the Eastern Front. His superiors began studying his techniques, sending other pilots to mimic his approach. Yet Rudel never sought glory for himself. His obsession was simple. The mission comes first. Accuracy, courage, and survival follow. One mistake and men die. That is enough motivation. Living on the edge. Life on the Eastern Front demanded mental and physical endurance beyond imagination. Rudel endured freezing temperatures, constant danger, and relentless combat. Every day he faced the possibility of death. Every flight could be his last, and yet he thrived. Captures Rudel's transformation from a fearless Stuka pilot into a legendary tank hunter, a man whose courage, skill, and endurance seemed almost superhuman. By 1943, Hans-Ulrich Rudel had become a living legend of the Luftwaffe. Yet legend came with a price. The Eastern Front was merciless, and every day brought near-death experiences, miracles in the sky. During one mission, Rudel's Ju-87 was hit by anti-aircraft fire, causing the plane to spin violently. Smoke filled the cockpit. The controls were mangled, and survival seemed impossible. But Rudel refused to surrender. With unmatched skill and calm under fire, he stabilized the plane just enough to crash land behind friendly lines. Miraculously, he walked away, injured, shaken, but alive. Fellow soldiers recalled, if anyone should have died that day, it was Rudel. And yet he returned to the skies, as if death itself feared him. Heroism and leadership. By now, Rudel was not only a pilot, he was a mentor and inspiration. Younger Luftwaffe pilots studied his methods, admired his bravery, and followed his example in missions that seemed impossible. Every sortie he led became a lesson in courage, precision, and leadership. Soldiers under his command knew one truth: Rudel would never abandon them, and he expected the same courage in return. The human cost. Even as his fame grew, Rudel felt the weight of war. Every destroyed tank, every supply depot bombed, meant lives lost on the other side. He kept a private journal, reflecting on the destruction, responsibility, and the strange paradox of feeling alive only in the midst of chaos. War rewards the daring, punishes the reckless, and humbles the proud. Every day I survive is a gift I cannot squander. The legend solidifies. By mid-1943, Rudel had flown hundreds of combat missions, destroyed over 400 tanks, and survived incidents that would have killed most men multiple times. His reputation was cemented. Rudel was untouchable in the skies, feared by enemies, revered by comrades, and studied by superiors. Tells the story of Hans-Ulrich Rudel surviving the inferno of war, proving that courage, skill, and sheer determination could elevate a man into legend. By 1943, Hans-Ulrich Rudel had become the deadliest Stuka pilot in history. His name alone struck fear into Soviet troops, and every sortie was a masterclass in precision, audacity, and raw courage, unmatched precision. Rudel had refined his techniques to near perfection. Dive angles calculated to the millimeter, bomb releases timed with surgical accuracy, low-altitude passes that minimized exposure to anti-aircraft fire. His Ju-87s became instruments of destruction, systematically eliminating Soviet tanks, artillery positions, and supply lines. Comrades said, Rudel doesn't just attack, he annihilates. Every flight is a lesson in terror for the enemy. Heroic feats beyond belief. On one mission, Rudel attacked a column of over 40 Soviet tanks. Enemy anti-aircraft fire shredded his wings. Bullets tore through the fuselage. Yet he completed the mission, destroyed dozens of tanks, and returned to base, barely able to walk. On another, he flew multiple sorties in a single day, totaling over 10 hours in combat, never landing until every target was neutralized. Near-death experiences. Despite his unmatched skill, Rudel faced death repeatedly. Wounded by shrapnel during tank attacks, bullet grazes through his head and arms. Aircraft hit mid-dive, forcing crash landings. Each time he survived. Each time he returned. His crew joked, Rudel doesn't bleed, he just takes notes, becoming a symbol. By the end of 1943, Rudel had destroyed hundreds of enemy tanks, earned the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, the highest German military honor, become the symbol of unbreakable courage and unstoppable skill. Yet Rudel remained humble. He did not seek fame. He sought only to perfect his craft and survive the war that demanded everything of him. Marks Hans-Ulrich Rudel at the height of his legendary career, the man who became the Eastern Front's most feared and deadly pilot. By 1944, Hans-Ulrich Rudel had survived more injuries than most men could endure in a lifetime. His body bore the marks of relentless combat: bullets, shrapnel, frostbite, and burns. Yet his spirit remained unbroken, and he returned to the skies every chance he got, surviving against impossible odds. During one fateful mission, Rudel's Ju-87 was hit by anti-aircraft fire. His aircraft spiraled out of control, yet he managed a crash landing behind friendly lines. He suffered multiple shrapnel wounds, and yet within days he returned to flying. Another incident left him with serious leg injuries, which could have grounded any pilot permanently. But Rudel, ever relentless, insisted on returning to combat, determined that no injury would keep him from his mission. Soldiers and medics were in awe. Most men would have retired, but Rudel, he treats pain like an inconvenience, not a barrier. The cost of legendary courage. Rudel's unwavering commitment came with a human cost. Every mission took its toll. Pain and fatigue that never fully disappeared. Constant psychological stress. Watching comrades fall in battles he survived. Yet he wrote in his journal, "Pain is temporary. Victory is eternal. One must endure to leave a mark." Living legend. Despite the toll, Rudel's reputation soared. Enemy troops feared his presence. German soldiers looked up to him as a symbol of courage and perseverance. Hundreds of tanks destroyed, strategic targets demolished, countless lives inspired by his fearlessness. Even as the war grew increasingly desperate for Germany, Rudel's effectiveness never waned. He flew missions others refused, turned impossible situations into victories, and continually pushed the limits of human endurance. Portrays Rudel as more than a pilot, a man whose survival against all odds became a central part of his legend, a warrior whose courage and resilience were unmatched in the history of aerial warfare. By 1945, the war was ending, but Hans-Ulrich Rudel's legend had reached mythical proportions. He had flown over 2,500 combat missions, destroyed hundreds of tanks, artillery positions, and bridges, and survived injuries that would have killed ordinary men multiple times. A hero in the skies, Rudel had achieved what few could imagine: mastery of the Ju-87 dive bomber, tactical genius in anti-tank warfare, courage that inspired all who served alongside him. His accomplishments earned him the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, Germany's highest military honor, a testament to his skill, bravery, and unmatched dedication, the man beyond the pilot. Despite his fame, Rudel remained humble. He never sought glory for himself. His focus was always the mission, the aircraft, and the men he flew with. His discipline, precision, and unwavering courage set a standard for soldiers and pilots alike. Even after the war, Rudel's story inspired generations. Military historians studied his tactics. Pilots tried to emulate his skill. He became a symbol of human endurance, courage, and determination. Legacy of a legend. Hans-Ulrich Rudel's life was a story of fearlessness in the face of danger, unbreakable spirit despite injuries, mastery of craft through discipline and obsession, inspiration to comrades and future generations. Chapter 10 celebrates the culmination of Rudel's journey. From a sickly boy fascinated by airplanes to the deadliest Stuka pilot in history, a man whose courage and legacy continue to echo in the annals of military history. A true warrior does not measure his life in years, but in courage, action, and the lives he touches along the way. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, a legend whose story will never be forgotten.